Voxology podcast. Hello, welcome. You're not Voxology podcast. We're Voxology podcast, but you for
guys
whatever
are too,
reason,
basically.
well, yes, but I wanted to give room for people who didn't know what they were opening when they clicked on this.
You never know.
You never know.
I always have people walk up to me and they're like, "Hey, we started listening to your podcast, but there's never any tone with it, and so I don't know if that's like,
Yeah.
you know."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry,"
That
or
can go a
"Thank
lot of
you,"
different
or
directions. Exactly. You just texted me prior to us, that Springsteen made you cry and that you were ready to record. What's that about, Mr. Stafford?
There's a movie coming out called Springsteen Deliver Us from Nowhere, and it was a great book. I read the book. It's about the recording of the Nebraska record, which is one of my favorite all-time records. So it was a really cool, like, intimate look at him recording this little lo-fi solo record. And so the kid from The Bear, which if you haven't watched The Bear and you can handle lots of F-bombs, it's a really great show.
Okay.
That guy's playing Springsteen in the biopic. So they were on Kimmel's and doing a few shows in New York at these big theaters. And so he had on the actor and Bruce last night. So over my oatmeal this morning, I was watching the interview, and they went through all this, talking about, because Springsteen's been doing this for 50 something years. So, the amount of stories that guy has are just crazy. But Kimmel was talking about, asking him all these like nerd questions about songs, but then he's just like, "Hey, you have been like out there talking to people. You've been very vocal, but in like a hopeful way for people, for Americans, kind of like with what's going on in our country and blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "Yeah, I've kind of been a musical ambassador for like 50 years for this country, like going out to other countries." And he has a song called Land of Hope and Dreams that they play every night. And it kind of jives with how you've been talking about hope. And he's just like, "I still play that song in other countries." And he's like, despite all the division, despite all of the chaos, despite all the negativity and all the stuff that's happening right now, he's like, people still look at America as a land of hope and dreams. Like there's still like a really positive hope for what this country is, that people are waiting to withstand this time period so we can get it back to what it was. But just made me feel like emotional about hope, and because the news is really, really overwhelming every single day. You and I were texting yesterday or so about how many mass shootings there's been since what happened to Charlie Kirk, and it's a lot.
Yeah,
like there's been an uptick. Like there was a violent thing, and now there's been more violence as a response to it. And so I needed to hear somebody. He's such an eloquent speaker, and he's seen so much. It was helpful to kind of listen to him talk about people still see this country as the land of hope and dreams. I still see it as that. That's kind of what he was saying. So I don't know. It made me feel emotional this morning over my oatmeal.
Yeah, and oatmeal itself for middle-aged men can be a source of emotion.
It can. I don't want to make it, but I do.
So awesome, dude.
It combats my ego addiction.
Well, do you have both, or are you choosing between one?
Sometimes, but man, I'm trying. Like, if there's egos in the house, I have a really, really hard time not.
It's true. It is one of Stafford's dark masters.
It
is the ego. And what do you put on it? Just butter
syrup.
And just syrup.
Yeah, sit down my coffee, and I will devour those in like 30 seconds.
What's your record? How many at one sitting?
This is terrible. I don't know what my record is, but I usually have 5. And then I justify it when I go like, well, if I go to a restaurant and get a big Belgian waffle, that thing's huge. These are kind of tiny, so you stack them up, and I don't know.
That's so great. Tim, thank you for this insight. How does Tim stay
everybody
centered?
Wanted to know.
Yes.
Waffles and Bruce Springsteen.
I mean, that's not a bad combo. Let's just start there. I hope that you all have had a week out there. A week. There's just so much happening in our church and in our community, and it's absolutely insane. So I want to just spend a moment on why we've been talking about the things that we've been talking about, just as a reminder. Um, at least for me, I don't know about Waffle Boy over here, but like the issue isn't how people vote or how they voted. That's not I don't think that's the role of the church. I don't think that's the role of Christians, is to monitor how each other votes and, arbitrate which is the Christian response or whatever. But as we've said time and time again, what's happening is that the gospel that's being preached doesn't match the gospel of Jesus. And it doesn't matter if that came from a Democrat or Republican, our response would be the same. So we're not, there's no partisan agenda to get people to vote a certain way or something. I think for us, we're just, or I feel a big responsibility to help clarify what it is to be Christian and what's being proclaimed and done in the name of Jesus. Let's just hold it up to what Jesus himself says and does. And I think that's a very fruitful endeavor. To me, that's not deconstructing, that's reconstructing. Part of what you do when you're a center focused community. That's it, is that you're constantly, whenever the umbrella of Christ or the language of Christ or the authority of Christ is being employed by political powers, no matter in which direction, we have to be incredibly skeptical and recognize the trap for what it is. And so, yes, this happened. This is happening in a very distinct political partisan direction, and so we're very critical of the partisan direction that it's going in. But I just think if the Lord's Prayer were undercut by Democratic Party images of war machines, and there was a Joe Biden Bible or whatever, we would have the same sorts of issues. And I just want to throw that out there because there's so much floating around about that's using Jesus language that I just feel this deep sense of I don't know, like restlessness or call or whatever, to just keep going, well, okay, let's hold that up to what the scriptures say and just see. And so the posture I want to have is one of compassion, but I also want to have one of curiosity. And so I came across a statement in Facebook, Facebook, that
can't
provoked.
Be bad if it came from Facebook.
No, it provoked wonderful curiosity in me this week, and Tim, I'm eager to hear what you think of it. All right, so
I have no idea what this is.
I know. There are times Tim does know, and there are times Tim doesn't know. And
Tim doesn't know much about much.
That's not true. But this was on Facebook, and this was being reposted by people in my circle who I would respect and who I know to be thoughtful and whatever. So I'm going to just quote the post. Too many Christians, including pastors, are judging Charlie Kirk's ministry by offense, not truth. They're distancing themselves because his campus talks unsettle people, as if controversy negates gospel impact and value. This is backwards. Truth offends. It always has. Why was Jesus crucified? He offended people. Why were the apostles martyred? They offended people. If we're unwilling to cause offense, we've chosen the wrong worldview. Scripture itself is offensive to fallen minds. Kirk delivered what modern Christians desperately lack: courage. We've been drowning in talk about winsomeness, endless chatter about contextualization, countless demands for relevance, but about courage, crickets. Yet courage is what makes effective ministry possible. Real cultural engagement, real evangelism, real apologetics. Without it, winsomeness becomes cowardice, dressed up in theological verbiage. Contextualization becomes compromise with a seminary diploma. Kirk strove for winsome. Kirk was relevant. Kirk was the most culturally engaged Christian of our generation, but what made him effective wasn't his polish, it was his backbone. He had the spine to speak complete truth in a culture that demands partial lies. As Jesus warned, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. John 15:18. Hatred and offense are the world's natural response to uncompromising truth. That's not just ministry, that's New Testament Christianity. So I instantly, and this is work for me, but I'm constantly seeing what's being said, and I'm curious about it. And I had two initial responses, and I'm curious to hear what yours are. One is that I think there's something true about Charlie Kirk's appeal, which was that he would stand and debate in places that were hostile to his views or to himself. He engaged with people that, were coming in hot, and he articulated consistently his worldview without flinching or softening or compromising. And so I'm like, well, yeah, that's right. I mean, there's part of that I'm like, yeah, that's what Paul would do or what Jesus would do. And I understand like the background thought of, well, yeah, Christianity, the claim that like Jesus is God in flesh, and we have to accept him for salvation. I mean, I get why that would be considered offensive. So in one sense, I was like, okay, this is standard. Like when I was big into Christian apologetics, this is very standard stuff. You give a reason for the hope that you have. You do it with gentleness and respect. And and you don't back down. But the gentleness and respect is the really part.
Until it escalates.
Well, and I make no judgment. I have not watched a lot of Mr. Kirk's videos. Again, I'm not talking about him as the individual person, but he's become the emblem of an ideology that claims for itself gospel. What he's doing is preaching the gospel. And the critique here is, if you're not doing it this way, then you're not preaching the gospel, and it's a form of compromise or cowardice. And that's what provokes curiosity to me. Is on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, we should be more courageous. Like you and I had this great conversation. I have long hesitated telling people that I'm a pastor. If I'm just at pickleball or on an airplane or out and about, I never lead with that, because people then change their behavior, and the whole interaction becomes artificial, or they make assumptions about what kind of pastor I am, and they assume a whole lot of things. And so I just try to take that dynamic out of it. And I've often wondered, is that wisdom and winsomeness, or is that cowardice and compromise? And you and I have been talking lately about becoming ordained so that we can wear the collars. And I've totally shifted radically on the whole pastor thing, going, nope, I actually think I need to be announcing this with much more vigor, not because to not is cowardice, but because I feel like the cultural moment sort of demands people who are willing to sit with those expectations that others will put on you and try to reshape them or subvert them or surprise them. And so there's a part of me that I can understand people looking at Charlie Kirk and saying, man, this guy was courageous. This guy stood up for things. This guy went into the lion's den and stood up for Christ and preached Christ. And I see why that's so attractive, particularly in the kind of mushy fuzziness of so much of American evangelicalism. So I just, on the one hand, I'm like, got it. I understand it. But on the other hand, there was something really unsettling about reading that, because the questions I wanted to ask were, okay, so what was the offense that was Jesus crucified? Why were the apostles martyred? And is Charlie Kirk a symbol or a representative of the same thing that got Jesus and the apostles in trouble? Or is there something off? And so I sat with this curiosity that we're constantly trying to model here, which is I want to swim in waters of people that don't agree with me already. I have no problem doing that, and I don't want to just sit in contemptive judgment over people. So I want to be curious when I come across something like this. And part of me, there was an impulse that said, okay, I can understand why boldness, man, that's really attractive. Clarity, really attractive. Certainty, really attractive. I get that. But there was something unsettling about it. Now, when you heard that, Tim, like, did you have a similar response, or was it from the outset you knew where this was going and we're able to sort
Well,
of see the
yes.
good parts of it.
I think we grew up with that rhetoric all the time. Like, speaking the truth sometimes is like derogatory to people, and that's love, right? Like speaking the truth and being offensive or whatever is loving people. And that never sat well with me. And then as I got older and learned more, then I was like, oh, I understand why. And I don't have any thoughts on, I have thoughts on that individual and whatever. But I think for me, the thing that really pops in my head is anytime I have this conversation with people, I always ask, well, can you define truth? What does truth mean? So if the truth is offensive, what was the truth that was offensive? And what does it mean that it's offensive? And what is the gospel? Like, at least the gospel is being advanced. Well, what is the gospel in your terminology based on the conversations that you're watching? Because as I get older, this entire narrative, and I know I beat it over and over, but I take great comfort in finding that through line from Genesis 1 to the end of Revelation. Like, that has been the biggest strengthening of my faith, has been understanding that there is a through line here, and it's not always like what you think it is, or it's not always clear, but there is a connective tissue. And so when I look at these conversations, I always look at the whole conversation, not the singular moment. And so it does, I want to be curious. I'm struggling a little bit with it in this time and in this conversation. Like with my classroom, there's not always a lot of curiosity with 18, 19, 20-year-olds because the reasoning function hasn't been fully developed. You know, they come in with a lot of confidence. And so I feel like my job is not to like beat down their confidence, but to provoke curiosity or to provoke critical thinking, to say, hey, that's an interesting thing you just said, but how do you, like, what do you do with this? What do you do with this? And try to continue that conversation. When I see the gears turning, then I feel good. And that's for me too. Like, I'm trying to keep my gears constantly turning.
Oh, they're turning.
I'm trying to read what I can to provoke things. I'm trying really hard not to settle or to be just angry all the time. So I think for me, that's what the curiosity looks like. We've joked around about apologetics. Like when we had to go to the beach for, I just would hide around the corner until the time was done. And then, because I hated it. I hated how it felt. It didn't feel right. It felt gross to me. It did not feel like this is what Jesus would be doing. And I'm not Jesus. I think I always struggle with that
we've
too.
We've established clearly.
I may think that my therapist says I have a savior complex that somebody put in me at a young age. That we're trying to figure out why.
Oh, you're awesome.
But yeah.
Well, I think that's the question I want to wrestle with today. Is Christianity is offensive, but what's that mean? And how was it offensive? And why was it offensive? So my curiosity goes, okay, so what are the big passages that are used by people who would post something like this? Because there's part of it that's like, I don't want to be ashamed of the gospel. And then there's a part that I was like, I don't know, there's something off here. So since John 15 was quoted, let's quote it in context. Though, if the world hates you, keep in mind it hated me first. If you belonged to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. This is why the world hates you. Remember what I told you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. They will treat you this way because of my name, for they do not know the one who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not be guilty of sin, but now they have no excuse for their sin. Whoever hates me hates my Father as well. If I had not done among them the works no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. As it is, they've seen, and yet they have hated both me and my Father. But this is to fulfill what is written in the law. They hated me without reason. Interesting. All right, so let's keep that John 15 passage in view. The other one that I thought of is Romans 16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first the Jew and then the Gentile. And then the most exhaustive treatment of how the gospel is effective or offensive is in 1 Corinthians 1. So I'm going to read this text, and this is the one I think that we can sort of pick apart a little bit, or at least ask questions of. So this is Paul writing 1 Corinthians 1:18. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, and we quote from Isaiah here, I will destroy the intelligence of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and is the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were influential. Not many of you were noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, the weak things to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us the wisdom from God, that is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. And so it was with me, brothers and sisters. When I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. I came to you in weakness with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. Now this one, so this is just my brain. I'm not even preparing for a podcast. I'm just like, well, okay, those are the three passages I thought of that I think people could refer to say, yeah, it was his courage. And yeah, I mean, of course it's offensive. It's a stumbling block and it's foolishness. Of course it's offensive. And so we can hold up the offense that people are taking at some of Charlie Kirk's words or actions or whatever and say, yeah, well, that's just what happens when you preach the gospel. And so that's my question, is that just what happens when you preach the gospel, or is there something else going on? So, Tim, if it's okay with you, considering you have no say in the matter, I would love to poke around in this passage a little bit, this First Corinthians passage, because I think there's something, at least that I miss upon first reading when I hear this. All right. So this is going to be about 20 minutes worth of babbling with hopefully some relevance, some application down the road. So Paul's fundamental assertion is that the logos, the message, the word of the crucifixion, the Messiah Jesus, is the power of God released into the world. It's the power and wisdom of God. Now, power and wisdom are these loaded words to the Corinthian community. In fact, they're so much. These words and their opposites are used dozens of times. So like, there was a scholar that just did a study on how many times these words are used, and I'm not going to bore you with that, but the words and their cognates, like wisdom, wise, those words are used all over the place. Power, powerful, be able, those are all riffs on the same Greek word. Foolishness, foolish, make foolish, that's all the same Greek word. And then weakness or weak, it's the same forms of the same Greek word. And so this contrast seems to be fundamentally between wisdom and foolishness, power and weakness. So wisdom and foolishness, power and weakness, that seems to be the contrast that Paul here is setting up. So being able to do something versus weakness, and then wisdom versus foolishness. So you're like, okay, that's the central contrast in this text. Now, what's Paul going to do with that contrast? Well, he's going to deconstruct and reconstruct their ideology of power and wisdom. Now, for the Corinthians, power and wisdom were really loaded words. And we could do a whole series on this, but in Corinth, there were two forms of culturally respected power. One was magic, and one was wisdom. Wisdom was demonstrated by the sophists, by the philosophers, by the Epicureans. Wisdom, the Stoics. Wisdom was there were ancient jokes made about Corinth and Athens, that you would walk around these ancient cities, and as many corners as there were is as many opinions as you would run into. Remember, Paul gets pulled into the Areopagus in Athens to preach this, for people to hear this new philosophy he was preaching. So they were absolutely infatuated with wisdom, and they were absolutely infatuated with power. And so here comes Paul with seemingly neither. He's not impressive, he's not a rhetorician, and he's not powerful in person. And so the Corinthians are going like, this doesn't jive, because his letters seem to be powerful and have wisdom, but he's not so much. And so First and Second Corinthians are a lot about the divisions of the church that have been created because of Paul's sort of unimpressiveness in his ministry. And so what Paul's going to do is he's going to take their definitions of wisdom and power and flip them on their head. So he's going to deconstruct them and reconstruct them around the idea of the cross, which he's going to argue is God's power and God's wisdom. So what the Greeks think are wisdom isn't wisdom, it's foolishness. And what they call foolishness, the crucified Messiah, is actually wisdom. And so too with power. Now, this turns out to be the offense. It's not the political implications of the gospel. The offense of the gospel, as Paul is going to explain, is the idea of a crucified Messiah. That's the offense. And I just want to justify that line of thinking, going, okay, I'm all for people being offended by this. But to add to the offense by equating this with other things, that's where I think my discomfort was coming in. So I want to go through this text like I would if we were in church. I want to just do a little bit of text, a little bit of exposition, a little bit of text, a little bit of exposition. And Tim, God bless you. You sit and look interested in the middle of all of this verbal garbage. So he starts out by saying the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. Now that's an interesting present tense usage of the word perishing. But to us who are being saved, present tense, it is the power of God. So now we've got the juxtaposition of foolishness and power. And so we could spend time on this, but the fact that people are perishing or are being saved means that our normal calculus of salvation, that there was one point I became saved, and there was one point I rejected Jesus and perished forever, that's not true. We're in process and being cemented in destinies as we go. And Paul is going to argue that the difference between the two, those who see the cross as power and those who see the cross as foolishness, is some sort of renewed perspective that God gives through the gift of faith. And so, and we can understand that, right? A crucified Messiah, even though this language is so familiar, it's just become trite. A crucified Messiah makes zero sense to anybody in the ancient world, Jews or Greeks. This was what the offense was, is that it was, and he even says this, Jews look for signs, which are expressions of power, and Greeks look for wisdom. And the crucified Messiah fit neither category.
Yep.
And so it's
too important because we think of offense like a middle finger, or
right.
Do you know what I mean?
This is where we're going. Yes, this is it. This is it. This is it. So if we're going to use passages like this to say, hey, if you're being hated, then that's good because they hated Jesus. Well, Paul gets into, okay, so what was it? What was it that caused the animosity? Now, I have no doubt that part of the animosity Jesus caused was redefining the priesthood, the sacrificial system, and the temple around himself. Man, that was absolutely offensive. No freaking doubt. But what he did it wasn't just that he deconstructed them, but he placed all of those, he placed himself in the middle as their replacement, right? So of course that would be offensive, but he did it at great cost to himself, right? And offering himself as the replacement for the things he was deconstructing. And so we've got one event happening, the crucifixion of the Messiah, and two totally different interpretations of it. That's why Paul will now employ this passage from Isaiah that says, God says, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. And that's just another way of saying, God saying, I will show the wisdom of the world to be foolishness and the foolishness of God to be wisdom, right? Mm-hmm. That's all that is. And it comes from Isaiah 29, where it's this interesting passage about speaking to Jerusalem, about its hypocrisy and empty religious ritual, and how the religious people who should know better have missed him and the works that he's doing. And so he goes on this mini rant. Where's the wise person? Where's the teacher of the law? Again, teacher of the law, I mean, that's a Jewish station. Where's the philosopher of this age? That's a Greek station. Has God not made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in God's wisdom, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. In other words, the wisdom of humans didn't lead naturally to the conclusion of a crucified Messiah, right? There was nothing we could guess about God just from human wisdom other than there's something here and it's an ordered universe. That's what Romans 1 seems to indicate. We can see there's something true about God just from our own observations, but that doesn't lead us to a crucified Messiah. And the fact that, I mean, and so this isn't like I've used this, or I've heard this used against human scholarship, and that's not what's denigrating at all. It's just, it's denigrating the pride that says we can know God on our terms, right? We can understand, we can through rational principles. And this was the great project of some of the philosophies of ancient Greece, was that we want to understand the universe through unaided natural reason. And what Paul's arguing is, no, this is revelation, guys. This isn't natural reason. Like, you don't come naturally to the idea of a crucified Messiah. Wisdom doesn't lead you there. It's only foolishness that leads you there.
I feel like you've said about 9 things in the last 3 minutes that could be each one could be a series.
Oh my goodness. It's going to get
like
worse.
Every one of these little things is very loaded. Like, that's a very loaded idea. And what does that mean?
Yes. Well, Paul helps. I mean, Paul gets into this more. So he actually fleshes this out in a couple of places. So he quotes from this Isaiah 29 and then says, listen, at the end of the day, the wisdom of the world did not know the wisdom of God. And so what God had to do was to confront the wisdom of the world with what they think is foolishness so that they might actually know God. Then he gets into this idea, Jews, and so what is the expectation of the world? Well, Jews demand signs or symbols of divine power. And Greeks look for wisdom again. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Now this, we got to unpack this for a little bit. All right, so when he says the Jews demand signs, you see this all throughout the Gospels. What sign will you give us that backs up your claim to authority? And even the crucifixion and resurrection.
I've prayed that 1,000 times.
Absolutely. But I think for the Jewish audience, the sign meant that he was the Messiah come to deal with Rome.
Right.
And so the signs were attached to power.
Yep.
They weren't compassion, although they had that, like the feedings of the 4,000 or 5,000. But the power existed to deal with Rome, I think, in most of the educated sort of Jewish expectation of the day. And so God was to come, and the Messiah was to come to crush Israel's enemies. And so if God did visit the world, it would be in power. The idea that the Messiah would be crushed by Rome would, in weakness, in defeat, and in humiliation, come on now. And so Jesus, except for signs about his resurrection, very rarely did miracles on command for this very reason. When it says that Greeks look for wisdom, again, the Greek worldview is that the human mind can understand the orderliness of what's been made. And there's some really great stuff. The Greek philosophy, I mean, whether it's Aristotle,
Yeah.
Plato, Socrates, the Stoics today are getting a
Socrates.
brand new hearing. Socrates, of course. So one of the signs of divinity was wisdom, was logic. And so when the philosophers heard, Paul's message, they mocked him. Festus declared him out of his mind, because this just didn't make sense. And so to the Jews who demanded signs of power, and to the Greeks who demanded signs of wisdom, he preached Christ crucified, which isn't just the whole message about Christ, but it's that the Christ has come, and his enthroning as Christ came through his sacrificial and humiliating death. Like there's nothing in the ancient world that could capture the absolute ridiculous nature of that scandal. There's nothing that can capture that. And that's why Christian nationalists are so offended. See, what I want to argue is the reason there's so many people angry at those of us who are saying, listen, I'm not sure that's the gospel, is because they will say the weakness, meekness, we've tried loving your enemy. It doesn't work, right? That stuff literally fails. Yeah. And that's the offense of the gospel, I would argue, because that's what Paul is arguing here. That's the offense. Now, I do agree that if someone were to say, hey, do I think there are many gods out there? Nope. I think Jesus is God in human flesh. And as God in human flesh, I think Jesus reveals what the true God looks like. Absolutely. Would that be offensive to some people? Sure. Would some people say, hey, do you think I'm fallen and can redeem myself? And I'd say, well, I think we're all fallen, and I don't think we can get ourselves out of this jam. Absolutely. So there's an offense there. I get that. But when the offense of the gospel is tied to political power or partisan opinions about things, we've robbed the cross of its power, because the cross says divine wisdom and power look nothing like political power and wisdom. And so this is just where, like, the insults that come our way sometimes, because we're literally saying, well, you can't follow the Sermon on the Mount and engage in a culture war at the same time. Like those are not, I did not receive very neutral statements and pushback, like the insults and the outrage at this. And it's like, well, there's the offense. There's the offense. That the kingdom comes not through political power or culture warring. The kingdom comes through self-sacrificial love. That's the offense of the gospel. So when Paul says we preach Christ crucified, he's saying to the Jew that the militaristic Davidic king that was coming and the suffering servant of Isaiah are the same person, not two messiahs, but one, and they both are manifested in this Jesus of Nazareth who was crushed under the Roman boot. Like, that's really brutal. And Paul calls that a stumbling block or a scandalon, which is where we get the word scandal. It's like so many of the Jewish hopes were restoring self-governance to Israel. And that's why the last question Jesus' disciples asked him in the book of Acts is like, are you going to restore the kingdom now? Like, wasn't that the whole point?
By the way.
Right. And given those expectations, like, it's just insane. I mean, I don't have the words to describe how outlandish this would have been, because we're saturated in Christian Easter imagery. Like, well, of course, dying and self-giving, of course, that's heroic. But to the Jews and the Greeks, like, that wasn't heroic. That's not how heroes died. Like, to ask Jews of that day to boast in a cross would be similar to asking the Jews of our day to boast in a gas chamber. Like, these were symbols of oppression. These were symbols of terrorism. These were symbols, like, of domination. Like, how in the world could Messiah come under these circumstances? And so scandalon or scandal, I mean, that's such a good word for what this was. Now, to the Greeks who loved wisdom, part of wisdom in Greek culture was etiquette, knowing what to say and what not to say. and when to say it and when not to say it. And so there's a great deal of ancient writing from the Greeks about the scandal that crucifixion was in polite Greek society. In fact, so one scholar puts it this way: when the Greek passes the judgment of folly on the Christian message, he's not thinking of the mystery of the cross, which he does not know or understand, but of the violation of etiquette, which forbids any reference to the ugly execution of slaves in the company of worthy citizens. So, like Cicero would refer to the cross as the unlucky tree, and argued the very word cross should be far removed, not only from the person of a Roman citizen, but from his thoughts, his eyes, and his ears. He called crucifixion the most painful and ignominious punishment, and the most miserable and most painful torture appropriate to slaves alone. Josephus called this the most wretched of deaths. Quintilian, the Roman rhetorician, said, when we crucify criminals, the most frequented roads are used where the greatest number of people can look and be seized by this fear. Every punishment has less to do with the offense than with the example.
There's no better way of stripping power from
right.
a figure that has power than to publicly humiliate and let them die slowly on a public arena like that. Like,
but they would be nude.
100%. Yep.
So that's public embarrassment, particularly for Jews.
Mm-hmm.
They would be eye height. They were not up on these big, tall crosses. They were eye height. So you would see them, you could speak to them, mock them, spit upon them, suffer them, throw things, or mock them, throw things at them. Your body would sit and be mutilated and attacked by wild animals. I mean, it just, there was the universal testimony of the ancient world is this is literally the worst thing you could do. It was reserved only for the lower classes of people. And so
even that statement,
right?
So terrible, reserved for the lowest class of people.
That's right.
Like,
that's right.
It's just
and that's
a layered
why Paul,
onion.
In Philippians will say it's not just that he became obedient, taking the form of human, but he became obedient unto death, even death on a cross. Like there's no, like stepping down to humanity is low. Dying as a human is lower. Dying as a slave is lowest. And that's why Jesus now occupies the highest honor of any human being ever, because of the descent he made. So, you know, for the Greeks sacrificed themselves. The Greek gods sacrificed themselves, but they were always heroic in so doing. And so, like the idea of lynching in the American South, I mean, held the same power. Like lynching or crucifying was declaring to the world that power and wisdom were on the side of the crucifier, not the crucified. Right? So if you wanted to know what power and wisdom looked like to Rome, it was the cross. Yeah. Rome had all the power, and wisdom was simply going along with the Roman agenda for the world, or else this would happen to you. And so Paul's arguing, hey, for both groups, you've started from the wrong place. Your demands for power, you've defined power wrongly, and your demands for wisdom, you've defined wisdom wrongly. And your demands for power and your demands for wisdom have ironically kept you from understanding God's supreme self-revelation.
See, that's a whole series right there too. What does that really mean outside of just those words?
Yes, well, we'll get there.
It's big.
It's coming. Oh, Timothy, I love you. So we're back now to verse 24. All right. Jews wanted signs. Greeks demand wisdom. We preach Christ crucified. But to those who God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Now, this is really, really important. He's not just talking about Christ in general. He's talking about Christ crucified here as the power and wisdom of God. Now, the power of God, Paul is going to argue, means that God does something in and through the cross. So later he will say, what does he say? It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. So the power of God and the wisdom of God do two things here. One thing, they save, like they achieve something in the world. But the bigger thing that Paul is saying is that they reveal what God is like. So the cross, Paul is going to argue, is not only something that secures salvation and is the source of salvation, but also is the revealing of what God is like and how God works in the world. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so what's the offense? The offense, again, is that power and wisdom have been radically redefined, and that anything that claims that power and wisdom that does not comport with a crucified Messiah is not power and wisdom, no matter how much it's fawned over in the world.
No matter how many gold toilets
Holy
you have.
crap. Bro, it's so good. So good. The cross is the revelation of God's mode of action in the world. That he doesn't coerce, he doesn't demand outside of whatever he is willing to do himself to provide what he himself has demanded. I love John Barclay puts it this way: the wisdom of God is not human wisdom enhanced, and the power of God is not a more powerful version of human power. Right?
That's
so
it,
when the
though,
gospel preached, when the gospel preached is just supporting human wisdom and human power, then it's not the gospel that's being preached. And the offense therein isn't the offense of the gospel. Come on, bro. As the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. repeatedly said, that event on Calvary is more than a meaningless drama that took place on the stage of history. It is a telescope through which we look out into the long vista of eternity and see the love of God breaking forth into time. Bro, it is an eternal reminder to a power-drunk generation that love is the most durable power in the world, and that it is at bottom the heartbeat of the moral cosmos. Come on now. Or let me quote the Catholic theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but man, what a freaking great name for a Catholic theologian. Being disguised under the disfigurement of an ugly crucifixion and death, the Christ upon the cross is paradoxically the clearest revelation of who God is. Any manifestation, any human manifestation of power and wisdom must operate in God's own way, for it corresponds with God's own nature as revealed in Christ in the cross. Any manifestation of human power and wisdom. Any other type of power or wisdom, any other theology or practice is a profound misrepresentation of God. In other words, it is either blasphemy, misspeaking God, or idolatry, making something other than God into one's object of worship and allegiance. Now, you say, okay, that's brilliant. What does that look like? You've literally said, what does that look like? Well, I'm going to give you two examples. Paul is going to give you two examples of what this looks like. The first example he's going to give is the makeup of the Corinthian community themselves. Hey, Corinth, does it make sense that you all would be the temple of the living God? No, none of you are of noble birth or high status. Give me a break. Proof that God works this way, this cruciform way, is the fact that you all are the church. Right? So he says, brothers and sisters, think what you all were when you were called. Not many of you were wise, not many powerful, not many of noble birth, but God, and this is all throughout the text, has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, the weak things to shame the strong, the lowly things and the despised things and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one can boast. Right? I mean, it starts back with like, why would you choose an old man and an infertile old woman to give birth to a nation? Why do you always choose the second son instead of the first? Why do you choose the youngest of Jesse's sons and the least impressive of Jesse's sons to be king? Why would you have Solomon pen a song of Solomon when he's one of the worst sexual sinners in the history of the planet? Why would you have David write the Psalms? Right? Why would you have Jacob be such a cheat and a manipulator? Or Paul be a slanderer of the faith and a murderer of the faithful? Or Peter, so dumb and impulsive, being the dude that recognizes and proclaims the divinity of Jesus? I mean, it's like, what? This is what God has done the whole time. And so Paul just looks at his community and he says, guys, if you want proof that God is this way, God doesn't use the powerful and the noble. He calls those that are not. If human wisdom is ashamed by a crucified Messiah, then so much for human wisdom, right? I mean, But for those who accept that this is the wisdom of God, now we're talking, right? Now we're the church. Now we're the temple of God. I mean, it's like, what? That's why the church was so ridiculous. It was so unimpressive and so marginalized and so nothing. And that's where it did its best work. Oh, there's so much more to say here. The second example he gives is of his own way of ministry. So first example of how this works out is look at the church. There's nothing impressive about it, and yet it's the evidence of God's work in the world. And then look at me, he says. And so it was with me, brothers and sisters. When I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom. This got him into all sorts of trouble, as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. In other words, his proclamation of the message about the crucified Messiah was done in a way that was congruent with the message of a crucified Messiah. It was not done with boasting. It was not done in pride. It was not done in contempt. Come on, man. I've lost you, Tim. Your face is speaking right now. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness and great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with the demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but God's power. And so here we are again, right? And so it's not just that God chooses the weak and the nobodies, but he uses the weak and the nobodies too. And Paul puts himself forward as an example. The fact that he glories in all of the criticisms that he's getting from the Corinthian community because he's not powerful and he's not wise. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Yeah. He's like, well, actually, this totally makes sense given the Christ that we're following. And so he didn't shy away from those things. I mean, if we could do a whole riff on like 2 Corinthians 10, 11, and 12, where he just boasts about everything that's weak about him. And so the biggest thing that Paul is arguing here is first, what looks like wisdom and strength isn't wisdom and strength. And what looks like foolishness and weakness isn't foolishness and weakness. And it's not surprising then that people don't understand this, because our definitions of power and our definitions of wisdom are vastly different. So we'll look at God's wisdom and call it foolishness, and we'll look at God's power and call it weakness. But actually, Christ crucified is the power of God and the wisdom of God in the world, which means it's not just something that does something, but it's an example to follow about how God is and how his people should be. And for proof of that, look at the community he's gathered and look at the preacher he's chosen. I have so much more. Okay, can I just do a couple of quotes?
Yeah.
Bro, I've got literally 5 pages more, but we're going to stop.
This was like a truck worth of food, though.
I hope so. This was just provoked by that Facebook thing to say, okay, what part of Christianity should people be offended by?
Yeah.
Because I've prayed often, I don't want to add to the offense, right? Because I do believe it. To the core of me, I believe it. But I don't want to take away from the offense, because I do believe it. To the core of me, I believe it. And so when people are offended, what's good offense and what's bad offense?
Yeah.
Right? So a couple of closing quotes. Oh, Tim, there's so much. There's 4 more pages.
We'll save them for next week.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what our audience does with this. If they say yes, more, Lord, more, then maybe. If not, the Lord's Prayer is just sitting there ready for us. Filipino social anthropologist Melba Padilla Mague says this about Jesus' death on the cross. In a mysterious way, what seemed like an act of supreme weakness and defeat proved to be the disarming of the principalities and powers. To embrace the ethic of the cross is to follow that same pattern. We exercise dominion and power not primarily by capturing positions of power and influence, but by servanthood to the larger society. And then Michael Gorman, who's one of my favorite New Testament authors, wrote a commentary on 1 Corinthians where he rewords Paul's argument and applies it to modern discussions. And so this is Michael Gorman channeling Paul if Paul were writing today.
Okay.
We proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to those who connect religion with political power, and foolishness to those who actually have secular status and power. But to those who are called to bear witness to God's way of life, the crucified Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than the wisdom of those who seek to foster civil religion or Christian nationalism for the supposed good of God and country. And God's weakness is stronger than Western military, political, and economic strength. Dude. Okay. All right, Timothy. Thoughts?
Oh man, I have a million. I feel like we are in such a desperate need. What does the Joker say? In this town needs an enema. We need like a all those terms. I feel like you have to start at the bottom and redefine
Reboot
every term that you just said, right? Whether it's power or the gospel or truth. I was thinking when I was a kid, I always felt weird when they would say that, we go to feed the homeless or whatever because we're commanded to. And even as a little kid, I was like, no, they're in need. We should be doing it because they're in need, not because we're being told to do it. And so our hearts need to be reconstructed to a point where we see fellow humans in a really dire situation, and our impulse is to lift them up, right?
Yeah.
Not out of guilt, not out of
because
duty.
we're religious.
No, just because they're human beings. But the difference between doing that because they're human and they're worthy of it versus doing it because it's the commandment, your heart's in a very different place, I think. And when we build a theology out of because that builds a hierarchy too. I'm the savior, or I'm the hand of the savior, something. So it starts to build a theology of separation. And so when you challenge power structures that are built on capitalism or military might, or whether a church is grabbing at political power or it's just grabbing at notoriety and public power, which you just listed, like all of those things are saying that you should, like, building your heart in a way that builds a theology of separation versus, because I have a dream in class yesterday. And I just sit there because it's like that speech is very famous for obvious reasons, but it's friggin' genius in the way that he constructs it. Like the metaphors he uses, the imagery that he uses that draws every single person in without being really explicit with it. The way he brings in my country 'tis of thee and the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and in Scripture, everything he does in there, he does in the most genius possible way to invite everyone into a conversation about everybody. And so when you challenge a theology or a politic of separation, you are coming after the spinal cord of the world. So of course that's going to seem offensive. You're challenging everything that we stand for and we live for. But if our theology is built on, that's what I mean. I just want to you guys had a great conversation on the Holy Post this week, and I can't remember exactly everything, but it made me think about how communal all the fruit of the Spirit is. Like, they're all super communal ideas, and they don't really work in isolation.
Yes.
Right? Like, am I just being kind to myself? Am I just expressing joy to myself? Am I just loving myself? No, they're really like, they're built for us to exist in a way that challenges the authority and the power of this theology of separation. So,
bro,
everything.
Okay. Can I jump
go
on
ahead.
that?
Yeah.
No, that's so good, Tim. I'm reminded of how the Beatitudes end. So we did the Sermon on the Mount thing years ago. And we talked about blessed, the word blessed, as not a ladder to climb. Blessed, you start by being poor in spirit, and then you're meek because you know your sin, and then you mourn over your sin or whatever. That's not how these work. That's a very Americanized version.
Mm-hmm.
These are Old Testament communities that all were hungry for something new. They were all like dissatisfied with the status quo and were hungry for Messiah to come. So it's not some pattern or some, like ladder of steps to climb. It was like Jesus is announcing the fulfillment of the hopes of the kingdom coming from the downtrodden. He's announcing to them they're the salt and the light, as part of his new community. But what's interesting is
That's offensive.
Well, just wait. The Beatitudes are bookended by a present tense promise, theirs is the kingdom, and then their future tense throughout the middle ones, and then the end one ends with theirs is the kingdom. So it's a future promises bookended by these like current realities of here I am, because I am present. But what's fascinating is the next to last one is blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Right, the new reality that Jesus is bringing doesn't just happen by itself. It has to be like contended for. It has to be fought for and prayed for and worked for. And so blessed are the peacemakers, right? Not peacekeepers. And we've talked about the difference between the two.
Huge.
But he then says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. There's that other present tense that bookends it. Now, it's interesting. There are some scholars that note that the promise of persecution comes to the meek, the poor in spirit, the gentle, the humble, the merciful, the peacemakers, as they try to enter into God's new world. It's as they do that, those are the ones that will be persecuted. Right? Persecution comes when you're bearing witness to the kingdom that elevates the downtrodden and satisfies the hungry and thirsty for righteousness. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So persecution, if it's true persecution, comes when you're enacting the reality of the Beatitudes, which is far different from the kind of persecution that original Facebook post was talking about. Mm-hmm. Right? To me, that's mind-blowing. Blessed are people when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For they persecuted the prophets who were before you in the same way. In other words, the boast of many that, hey, of course people are going to persecute us. They're going to hate us. That's just the natural word. That promise is given to the disciples in John 15, but it's also given to this motley crew of beatitude bearers in Matthew 5. And so the persecution is coming from from those on the margins who are advocating for those on the margins, right? As they bear witness to the kingdom that has come and is coming. In other words, it's another way of saying the same thing that Paul is saying, that when you step into the role of peacemaker, when you step into the role of meek and dissatisfied with the status quo, there's persecution to come, not because you're a jerk for Jesus, but rather the weakness that you're bearing witness to is offensive to the power structures of the world. And that's why our current president can listen to Erica Kirk forgive the oppressor and then say, that's something I just can't do. Right. I hate my enemies and I detest the people who oppose me. I mean, that's where you're like, yes, it's foolishness. It's like, that's the perfect illustration. The problem is when you meld those two together and the audience is cheering for both. Now we've left the gospel reservation, so to say. You empty the cross of its power whenever you tie the cross to earthly power. You
That's
can't
what I mean
do
about
it.
redefining all these terms. Like we read an article in class this week called "How Boys Become Men," and it's a little bit of
Oh
an
my
older
goodness,
article, and the
dude.
author is reflecting on his time as a youth. But it's
Oh,
always interesting because he's talking about like basically like how boys need to suppress their emotions to be, because that's what masculinity is to be strong and not to be emotive.
mm, mm,
And like if someone's going to hit you, you take the hit. And so
mm.
I asked my students, like, is this still a cult? Like, this is an older article, and he's reflecting on his youth, so it makes it even older.
Yeah.
Do you still see this? And all
Mm.
of them say yes. And I say, what
Wow.
happens to emotions when you bottle them up? Like, do they go away? Is it a sign of strength to be able to not emote? And then
Mm.
they're like, I was like, I have a bunch of psychology students. It's like, what happens? Like, it always comes out, and it never comes out well
Yeah.
when it's like bottled up in that way. So it's like we have to redefine what it means to be, what that power and that strength looks like for
Mm.
men, because the idea that masculinity is under threat, maybe that version is, and it needs to be. So there's
Yeah.
like the way we define, the way we posture ourselves in this world, and the way we cling to status and power. Of course, that's going to be offensive. But we grew up with the offense being like, "I'm good, you're evil." And
Mm.
that's the simplicity of it, is like, this is offensive to you because I'm telling you that the way you live is wicked and sinful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's it either. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if anything, I think that's modeling the reverse of this, because you are coming from a power over position in that,
That's
and
right.
you're condescending down upon people. So it's like everything needs to be
Yeah.
redefined back to what the
Yep.
intent was, because we are way off. We're so far out in the weeds. And no wonder it seems offensive, because this is like communally offensive. Not
Mm-hmm.
offensive in the way that Paul's advocating. This is offensive in the way that we understand offense.
Mm-hmm.
We are leading from a position of power over and hate, and it's not. It's a dying. I was reading
Mm-hmm.
like a whole bunch of background on Jesus cursing the fig tree, and it's just like, oh my gosh. I don't know. Anyway, there's so much
Well.
packed in here. I think it's so helpful to redefine like what does
Mm.
it mean to be a little Christ in this world? And so what
Mm-hmm.
did it mean for Christ to be a Christ in this world? What is it that we're even emulating?
Yeah.
What
And
is it
what's
that
it
we're
mean to
even
be offensive?
proclaiming?
Like, I agree there's offense here.
Yeah,
But
but it's
what?
not in the way that I think that we like to be like excited and proud of. It's like
Right. Right.
these systems, yeah, you are challenging. This is David and Goliath. Like, you're
Mm-hmm.
challenging an oppressive system, and that is offensive to the system and all the people who benefit from it and purport it and hold
Mm-hmm.
it up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're just seeing it all day long.
Yeah. I think it's also offensive to, I mean, certain modern sensibilities too. I mean, it's an ancient document that
100%.
talks about sexuality and God being revealed in Christ. And so I'm okay with people being offended by the message. But I just think when you start expanding the message to include limited government and
Right.
a view on transgender rights or whatever, I'm just like, well, I think we've left
Well, how
the
did
Christ
Jesus
crucified
challenge
part.
those things? His challenges were always invitations, or at least off the top of my head, as I'm thinking through a lot of them. It's like when he would challenge some system that was antithetical to the message, there was always an invitation attached to it that was like, this is what it means to, this is what's wrong with the system that you're purporting. Sell everything you have and go, and then come hang out with me, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Why is it so hard? Like, there's pieces of that. I feel like the way we deliver the message is often so offensive that it's not invitational. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like, this isn't good news. It's just saying that what you have is bad news.
Right.
And there's a
Right. Ooh,
big difference
that's
between
good.
those two things.
Let's end on that mic drop, bro. Great job. Well,
Great job, man.
family,
It's
we love you.
provocative stuff.
We well, for the two of us, it is. I don't know. Again, to the 4 people who've made it, and Seth, we love you.
I don't know if you see the YouTube comments, but they're all on there being like, I'm number 4, I think. Maybe there's more than 4 of us.
Oh, that's awesome. And we've had a number of people join Patreon, and just thank you guys so much for your support in the middle of all this. We really deeply are grateful for it. So, until next time, see ya.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for listening to this conversation. The Voxology podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is made possible by listeners just like you. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology podcast or on Tithely, tithe.ly, and just search Voxology podcast. Links for both are in the show notes and on our website. You can interact with the hosts on Facebook /Voxology podcast or on Instagram at Voxology podcast and on Twitter or X, whatever it is, at Mike Erie. Thank you for walking this long road with us.